Welcome all. Hopefully to see everybody this morning. My name is Jackie Garlock. I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center at the NYU Silver School of Social Work's McSilver Institute, and I'm really excited to welcome everyone today. We're going to give folks a couple minutes to sign on and get settled, and then we'll get started. Good morning. Morning, everybody. Hey. Good morning. Again, if you're just joining us, we're going to give folks just a minute or two to sign on, and then we'll get started. Good morning. Yes, happy Friday to everyone. Hopefully it's nice and sunny where you all are. Morning, yes. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us. And you'll see a lot of folks are putting their names in the chats. Feel free to introduce yourselves. We're really happy to see everybody here today. Okay, just give everybody another maybe 30 seconds or a minute to sign on, and then we'll get started. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll get started now. We want to make sure we're using everyone's time, and we're so grateful to have everyone here with us. So again, my name is Jackie Garlock. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center at the NYU School of Social Work's McSilver Institute, and I'm really excited to welcome you today to our panel entitled Meeting Them Where They Are, a panel discussion on best practices for supporting youth experiencing homelessness. Before we get started, I just want to orient everyone so that we all know. So as you'll see, everyone is being placed on mute. And if you're having any technical issues today, you can chat into our CTAC admin, who is my colleague Leslie. So you can definitely chat in and she'll be able to assist you. I'm hoping that folks will have things that come up for them in terms of questions during the event. So we would love if you all could use the chat to put in your questions throughout. We'll have about 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end for a question and answer time, and then we'll be presenting your questions during that time. So please use the chat, and also please use the chat just to share your reactions, your thoughts, whether you have any, whatever is being discussed is resonating with you. We really appreciate that. I think, and so yeah, we'll just get started now. I'd love to here we go. So, we are offering CE credits for the live offering today. So you must be a licensed social worker or mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist or psychoanalyst. You must be here for at least 75% of the offering and use attending your own Zoom link. And if you are eligible for CEs, you'll receive a link that allows you to access those CEs within 1 to 3 business days. And that all of this information is going to be emailed to you. So all the instructions for how to access those CEs will be available. And again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to chat to us in the chat. So I'm really excited to be here for this panel today. We are joined by our amazing colleagues over at Covenant House, New York. We have Lisa Crook, who's the Chief Program Officer, Brian Brano, Director of Mental Health and Anti-Human Trafficking Services, and Elizabeth Saka, who is the administrator of anti-human trafficking. And I'm really excited to have them all with us today to talk a little bit about best practices for supporting young people who are homelessness, or who are experiencing homelessness. For those of you who are not familiar with Covenant House, it is the New York's largest provider who serve homeless youth. They serve over 1,600 young adults, ages 16 to 24 annually, and they have all sorts of different services that serve these young people, ranging from health clinics to behavioral health services, housing programs, educational services, and more. And so I'm going to actually turn it over briefly to my panelists to introduce themselves, say hi, and then also to give us some background information on the population that we're going to be talking about today.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I've been monitoring the chat, and it is really cool to see so many folks from different parts of this work. Some of you are very much in it, so I'm excited for the conversation and the Q&A. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Covenant House, New York, and I'll turn it over to Brian to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Proano. I'm the Director of Mental Health and Anti-Human Trafficking Services at Covenant House. Very excited for this panel, especially for the Q&A. I love to get questions and reflect with people that are in the same field, doing the same work, and also just here for this experience. So really excited for this, and I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here, echoing what my colleagues have shared. So my job title is Administrator of Anti-Human Trafficking, but if you ask our young people, I'm a social worker. So I have kind of a split role where I am responsible for things on the program side, but I also provide individual therapy. So I'm excited to answer folks' questions, and thank you all for being here.
Amazing. So yeah, I'm going to now turn it over to Lisa to tell us a little bit about the population that you all are working with, and the work that you're doing with them at Covenant House to sort of do some level setting for folks. I know people are coming in with different experiences, and so I feel like it'll help us to sort of get to know you all and the work that you're doing and the folks you work with, as to get started.
Hello again. One of the most interesting things that I have learned in the last 2 years at Covenant House is just how huge the problem of youth homelessness is. I've worked with young people my entire career, from government, at children's services, to other nonprofits in New York City. And I did not realize that 4 million young people experience homelessness in this country every year. It's staggering. Many of them are under 18. 700,000 annually are under 18. So many young people also, almost half of them, experience it in fits and starts. They're homeless for a period of time. They get some permanency, and then they're homeless again. The other thing that's really important to know is about half of these young people, this is the first time that they're experiencing homelessness. Annually, about 2 million young people experience homelessness for the first time. So Safe Horizon has a few points to define youth homelessness. We unequivocally agree with this, and we'll talk a little bit more during some of our panel presentation about what it looks like, what a homeless youth looks like. But what it really can be as a young person is couch surfing. They're staying with friends. They're riding the subway. They're staying on the street. They are trading work or sex for a place to stay. Sometimes they think that they're staying with their partner, their boyfriend, who is actually trafficking them. Elizabeth can talk a lot about that. They're living in cars. They're sleeping in parks, abandoned buildings, other public spaces. And they're also staying in shelters like the ones we run at Covenant House. And Unfortunately, many of the young people are forced to leave home because they have no choice for a whole host of reasons. Some have actually been forced out of their homes and into foster care in unsafe group home or unsafe foster home settings, and they're leaving those as well. And they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have a network to support them, and we become that network. So a little bit more about the profile of who these homeless youth are. So it's really important to know that Black youth face a huge increased risk of homelessness to compare to white youth, and Hispanic youth as well. Notably, and I'm sure not surprising to any of you, about 40% of all homeless youth identify in the LGBTQ plus area as compared to 7% of the total US population. And when you think about what that means, being forced to leave home, who you are, your identity, it is not surprising. So young people who are pregnant or parenting have a 3 times higher risk of homelessness than non-parenting peers. We actually run 2 residential pregnant and parenting programs for this reason, especially with the goal of ending a cycle of homelessness and supporting the moms and babies, and so they can find permanency. So also, I mentioned this a second ago, but so many of our young people have experienced foster care. Some young people are currently in the foster care system and running away from that system, and some are leaving the system without a permanent option and without a permanent place to go, and they wind up in the homeless service system, and sometimes it ends up being the adult system because there's not space in the youth system. There's not options for them. So we have really failed young people in so many ways. Some of the issues that that we see in the youth homelessness sphere: human trafficking, obviously income inequality and poverty, like I mentioned, gaps in foster care, something we really see in New York City, but this is everywhere: lack of affordable housing. And we talk a lot at Covenant House about actual affordable for youth housing, because there are affordable housing opportunities, but affordable to who? Definitely not a young person who's in their first job making minimum wage or trying to go to school and try to have an apartment. There really are not affordable for youth housing opportunities. It's one of our strategic goals, is to actually create affordable for youth opportunities over the next 10 years. Racial discrimination, as I mentioned before, the huge disparities in race. And then something we'll dig into more deeply here are mental and emotional health, and talking about some of the nuance wrapped in that, and youth experiencing housing instability. So our goal, Jackie, did you want to do this, or you want me to go keep talking?
You go ahead. You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. Okay. So some of the goals of today's conversation, and we also hope the Q&A at the end will help shape some of this, so you walk away from this conversation understanding and hearing an analysis of the relationship between how trauma impacts youth homelessness and vice versa. We want to talk about how to best engage youth who are experiencing homelessness, and what that can look like in your work and within the confines of some of the policies and practices that you may have, particularly if you're a mental health clinic in the community. We want to discuss the role that mental health providers can play in preventing youth homelessness and supporting a young person who's facing housing instability. We also want to explore some strategies for navigating those common barriers to care, and that has a lot to do with how we implement practices and policies in our work. We also are excited to talk about how we approach and implement clinical interventions with this population, and how we really think about best practices, evidence-based practices, and things like that. I think
Okay.
that's it.
I'm gonna stop sharing just so that folks can see the faces of all of our panelists as we're having this conversation. Thank you so much for that really incredible intro. I feel like that really helped our audience really get to know the folks that you are working with at your agency and that they may be working with in their roles. Both in the city, but also across the state. And so you already told us a little bit about sort of the demographics of the young people that you serve in your agency, but I'm wondering if you want to tell us a little bit more about sort of those young people, what brings them to you, and what do you think sort of the primary factors are that contribute to them coming to your agency and presenting for services and experiencing homelessness? So yeah, I guess, Lisa, you've been talking, I'll give you a little bit of a break. Maybe Elizabeth, I'm wondering if you could start us out.
Yes, absolutely. When I think of our youth, I really think of how they have survived many different settings to get to our program. And we want our program to be a place where they have the security and the safety to thrive. And so a lot of our youth are coming from foster care. Maybe they were not adopted, or their adoption situation is not successful or safe. Some are coming from juvenile or ICE detention centers, and or just a home where the person that was responsible for caring for them didn't have the resources to do so, or it was not a safe situation. And so we are also seeing a lot of youth coming to us who are new to the US, who are now navigating social service systems for the first time. So we kind of have a mix now of youth learning the social service systems newly, or youth who have been in different social service systems their entire lives. So we want it to be a place where now they have a chance to feel safe so they can focus on what they want their next step to be, instead of an adult telling them the next step or failing to support them in the way that they should have promised.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, Lisa, Brian, I'm wondering if you wanted to chime in with any additional thoughts.
Yeah, just to add to what Elizabeth said, and I think she kind of just put it really nice and precisely, like the young people that we see every day. Um, when I think of young people, I think of them as survivors, but I also think of the words resiliency and courage. It's not easy to walk through those doors of a homeless youth shelter for the first time and be open to getting help. And these youth have experiences and have stories that we hear of abuse, of poverty, mental illness, the foster care system, like Elizabeth said, dealing with anti-human trafficking. And I think one of the most important things that to remember that we try and utilize with our staff and our young people is these labels don't define them. The fact that they're experiencing homelessness doesn't define them. The thing that defines them is the person they are and the fact that they're coming for the support. So I think that's one of the key things to remember about the young people that we see day to day.
To that to that point, one of the things that we say around Covenant House is that the least interesting thing about our young people is that they're homeless or experiencing housing instability. They really truly have huge dreams, big aspirations. Some of them are in school. Some of them, like they have housing instability. Many of us are one paycheck away from being in a similar situation. And I mean, we have a young person who is studying to be an ethnobotanist, which I didn't even know what that was until I met him. And he came to us when he was a senior in high school. He's been with us about 2.5 years, and he's about to go move and live in a dorm at St. John's with a full ride scholarship. So, least interesting thing is that he says houseless because his home is in his heart. But it's really important to know that while young people have come through a lot, they all are experiencing hopes and dreams and have big aspirations.
I love that. Yeah, it's really, and I think that many of the folks in the webinar really are familiar with that sort of strengths-based approach. And also when you have a young person sitting in front of you that is dealing with housing insecurity or homelessness, it can be hard not to just focus on that. And so remembering that that is really not the only thing about them. Yeah, so we, based on all these things you said, there's a lot of different situations that these young people are coming from. You mentioned things around human trafficking or sort of neglectful housing situations, systems involvement. So we know that the young people that often are dealing with housing insecurity or who are homeless have mental health needs both as a result of those, but also maybe independent from those. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what the mental health needs are of this population, and in particular, what makes it different than other folks that our audience members might be seeing for services. Sort of what makes it, what sort of unique needs might they have? And maybe Brian, I'm wondering if you could start us off this time.
Sure thing. Some of the mental health needs that we see vary on the spectrum of mental health. We see diagnoses every day from bipolar, depression, PTSD, to even schizophrenia and people experiencing psychosis. Um, One of the things to remember is that these mental health needs are sometimes from growing up in households or systems that did not either did not support their mental health needs, ignored them. We've had plenty of young people that their parents would tell them, like, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to see a therapist. You don't have to see a psychiatrist. Medication's bad for you. So it's just kind of ignored and swept under the rug. Or even some young people that had services forced upon them through systems. Like we had young people that had to have mental health support in school. They forced them to see a therapist, or um, in their household are forced to see a therapist. And these mental health needs um, can create a stigma around mental health um, when they are given or when they're not given. So part of the stigma is what we see at Covenant House day to day, where young people have the stigma around these these needs, and it's they have some hesitancy about experience starting to experience what the Covenant House mental health support can be. Um, we try to meet each youth individually as part of this process and kind of allow them to be the authors of their own story, giving them their self-determination and their mental health and other services they can receive through Covenant House. So they may need to see a therapist day to day. And we have social workers on site most of the week, and they can have sessions even multiple times a week. So we have the young people that need that. We have young people that just need somebody to talk to sometimes. And it could be a social worker, or it could be a case manager, a resident advisor, a security guard. Some people just need that person. And then some of these mental health needs are reflected of medication. And we're going to talk about this further down the line as well. But we have a federally qualified health center on site as well, that we have providers that can provide medication. But you also have a psychiatric nurse practitioner on staff as well that can provide medication for those mental health needs to support the young people in the collaborative process of medication and mental health services. So that's kind of a brief overview. And Elizabeth or Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that I keep in mind constantly when engaging with our youth around what kind of therapy services or structure they might want is to remember that our youth have had maybe like hundreds of adults try to introduce interventions, either social workers, therapists, case managers, um, adults who are supposed to, in a professional way, support them, who they feel failed by. And so for a lot of those clients, when they're utilizing outpatient therapy, like to start with history taking feels like I've done this a million times. Nothing has helped me so far. Why would I keep going to this person? Or sometimes if we're talking about, or when they've been forced to go to therapy, it's because there was some problem that was identified as the youth's fault. Like they were not engaging safely in class, or they were getting into fights at school. and their abuse wasn't identified. And so they were mandated to go to this therapy. And then their therapist was communicating with their caregiver about the sessions. And so it didn't feel private because it wasn't. And really the root of the issue wasn't addressed. So that's, I think, just really important to keep in mind what's in the room with you, because you're a brand new face, but there's been all these other therapists that youth have engaged with.
Yeah, it really feels like you're sort of, when you're sitting down in front of the young person, you're not just that adult that's with them in the room right now, but you are also representing every other adult that has told them that they would be there for them or show up for them, and then for whatever reason that hasn't panned out. I'm wondering, how do you create trust with a young person when that's sort of what you're up against, or build rapport? Because again, you're not just up against the sort of typical barriers that we experience with young people, but it's sort of it's almost like a higher threshold there, from what it seems. And Elizabeth, I'm going to just sort of punt back to you, since you were sort of just speaking on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that I'll ask folks is, have you ever participated in therapy before? And I can elicit, like, was there anything that was helpful? Was there anything that was harmful? And so then the youth and I can both name, like, yeah, like, you didn't have privacy the last time you went to therapy. This is how privacy looks in our relationship, right? Because obviously therapists are still mandated reporters, but we talk in depth about what is shared with other people. Or if you want me to share something with another person, then this is how it happens, right? That doesn't mean a blanket, now everything is out in the open. It can be this specific thing. Like, I'll say to the youth, sometimes you don't want to tell a story over and over. So you might say, can you tell my case manager these 3 things that happened this week? And so sometimes that's what sharing looks like. And also talk to them to say very plainly, like, you've had a lot of therapists. A lot of the time, it was not a good use of your time. It didn't feel helpful. So if at any point you feel that same feeling in our conversations, or you notice that you're not getting what you wanted, I want you to tell me. And then also, you have to be prepared for them to tell you that, right? You have to check your ego at the door and be prepared to have a very honest conversation and reflect, because sometimes youth give you feedback as a way to test. You say that you're safe. You say you're here to support me. If I push your buttons a little bit, what happens? Are you still as kind? Are you still as supportive? Are you still committed to supporting me? And that's also a way of them just testing people in their life of being safe. That's a way that they survived. So it's really like, you have to check your ego at the door, because everything they've done, they've survived a lot of experiences to get to be a young adult.
Just to add to that piece about the testing and the behaviors, it's also about us reframing those behaviors that have been identified as so negative for them and told their whole lives these behaviors are negative, reframing them as strengths, because that's actually what they are. They are how the young person has kept themselves safe. They are how they've adapted to the environment that they've been living in, and in a non-judgmental way, and a fully authentic and supportive way. Like, this is a strength. And then that helping establish some of the trust, the relentless engagement, is such a huge component of our work. We don't take it personal, but we're not gonna give up on you. We believe in you, and so we're gonna keep coming back, and we're gonna be there when, if you fall. We're gonna be there if you succeed. We're gonna be there no matter what. And then when they're ready, and we use a lot of motivational interviewing to help us with this. Everyone in our building is trained on it, not just the social workers, but we use that too to help them lay the foundation for when they're ready, to help change some of those adaptive skills into ones that are going to help them meet the goals that they have. And that is a huge component to building that trust, and just genuinely appreciating their humanness and how they have made it this far.
I love that. I also love the idea of having everybody in the building be part of the community of adults that is there for the young person whenever they need it, because you never know who a young person is going to attach to. It could be the person at the front desk. It could be the person that is, the intake person, or who is helping them to, deal with the homeless youth representative at their high school. It could be a lot of different people. And so having everyone sort of be available to them, that seems great. And it helps us to sort of think creatively about what does it mean to be therapeutic, and what does healing look like for these young people. I love that.
And that also, just sorry,
Yeah,
concretely too. Sorry, I
great.
said I wasn't going to talk a lot.
What we like.
It concretely helps create a warm handoff to the mental health team as well. Like that also helps in the trust relationship, because if there's somebody that they trust and I vouch for you and I say, Elizabeth, talk to Elizabeth, I could sit with you. Like, oh, Elizabeth is somebody I could share this with. I would trust Elizabeth. That's huge. And that is one of the most effective tools we have in getting some of our young people to engage with the mental health team, because of all the things that Brian and Elizabeth have already said with the stigmas, and all of the things that we all know about somebody seeking mental care.
Incredible. Yeah, I love that. I also like the words you used, relentless engagement. I feel like that is such a great term. That sort of, it both in terms of like just constantly showing up. And then also, I think what you talked about, Elizabeth, about checking your ego at the door, is that sometimes being relentless means we really have to be able to take that, what can feel like rejection, sometimes repeatedly.
Yeah, and to
Um,
add to that, Jackie, part of that relentless engagement is, yeah, checking your ego at the door, but also meeting them where they're at, right? Like some young people may not be comfortable with going to a social worker's office and sitting there for a therapy session, and because of stigma, because of what they've experienced in the past. So what our team does, and with the help of the residential team as well, and like Lisa said, the warm handles are great. The team, the mental health team, will go down to the cafeteria at times and like literally meet them where they're at and sit at the table and like introduce themselves and get to know them, or go to the residential floors and go to the room and introduce themselves, right? So we have the capacity to do so, and that can show that relentless engagement and show the young person, okay, this person is really making an effort. The social worker is really making an effort, rather than just sit in your office all day. You miss an appointment. All right, sorry, we'll reschedule, and that's it. The relentless engagement piece shows and can build the trust because it shows that people care.
Yeah, I read that's so important. I feel like, again, so many adults have not shown up. And so the showing up in all the different ways that we can interpret that showing up. You all have sort of already spoken to some of the barriers that can get in the way of young people, these young people accessing services. I'm wondering if there's any others you'd like to mention that are important for our audience to know about, and sort of how you help to manage those barriers. So yeah, sorry, Elisa, why don't you start us off this time?
I can start just by saying that from a policy perspective, and Elizabeth, I'll kick this off to you because you've really seen it in action, but from a policy perspective, having numbers of missed sessions that then end and terminate services, many of our things that help our business run, the operational side of things, are the worst barriers to care, and how we operationalize relentless engagement, because we can't just say it, we have to find concrete ways to operationalize that, is we don't have service termination. We don't have mandated, if you don't show up a number of times, we're gonna, we don't have that. And just one small way, but a huge, huge barrier. And I'll kick it off to Elizabeth to talk more about that.
Yeah, I think the mandated, like if you miss 3 sessions, that means that you're taken off the that you lose services. That's one of the biggest barriers. I think one of the things that's really helpful is when there's flexibility with in-person or virtual, because there's sometimes, if you're looking for a safe place to sleep, you might not be in the area you expected to be in, so traveling to the office might not be realistic. But just important to if someone is missing sessions or showing up late, or some things that we sometimes label as they're not ready for therapy or they're not committed, asking some questions to figure out, like, there might be another reason. It could be because they were offered overtime at work and they don't have the privilege to say no. It could be that you were supposed to have a virtual session, but the place they thought they were going to sleep, they weren't able to. And now the place they are sleeping, they don't have privacy, or they don't trust everyone in the apartment or area that they're in. Um, and, you know, I think another thing I see is when this is not always in our control perfectly, but when there's really long wait lists, that can be really discouraging for youth because they already feel like they're taking a risk to try out outpatient therapy since they've been mandated to do it for so long. And then to find out you have to wait a month or more is really disheartening. And they feel like, well, see, like it wasn't meant to be. And having really long intake process can also be discouraging if they have to come in person to do an intake before they can be matched, or if they have to answer really in-depth questions about their history, can feel like, I've already done this before and it didn't work. So what's going to be different this time? I think it's really important that we remember as providers that there are a lot of abusers that promise when we see that cycle of violence during the honeymoon phase, things are going to be different. It's going to be better this time. And that sometimes can be something replicated in service providers, is that we're saying our services are going to be great. It's going to be better than the other therapists you've had. So it's just important to be mindful when we might be replicating things without that being our intention, obviously.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. I feel like we don't, we know that services can be traumatizing for all sorts of reasons, but sometimes even the things that are well-intentioned, right? We're just saying those things because we have the best of intentions, but it can really bring up those same dynamics that they've experienced at the hand of abusers. Wow, yeah, that's really meaningful. I'm wondering, so I'm looking through our document. I'm wondering, so a lot of the folks that we're working with may not be working in the same kind of, shelters, or where they're specifically encountering young people who are homeless, but they may be working in outpatient clinics or in schools or in places where they're encountering some youth that may be experiencing housing instability, but they're also potentially encountering youth that may be at risk of experiencing homelessness. And I'm wondering, how can mental health providers, maybe what are some warning signs that they should look out for? And then also, what are some things that they can do in that role of mental health provider if they notice some of those things? I guess, Brian, why don't you start us off?
Sure thing. Some of the warning signs that we see time to time that could be an indicator of being at risk of homelessness is when we're with a young person face to face, it can be something as simple as a change in their affect, right? Less eye contact, less engagement in a session or in a classroom setting, um, and also just noticing the trends, right? Noticing if a young person's not getting their basic needs met, right? Whether you're in a school with them, whether you're in a doctor's office with them, and you're seeing that they are maybe not getting appropriate nutrition or malnourished, or if their hygiene has gotten worse, or if they are wearing clothes that are too big or baggy or too small or tight. Um, it's something as simple as that, something as simple as school attendance, right? Are they not attending school? And has that been something that has changed from the past? Or whether it's by them choosing not to attend, or whether they have parents that are neglectful that are not supporting them in attending. So we kind of see those warning signs early on, and those signs can lead to obviously some issues at home as well with the family. And that family dynamic can in turn cause potential homelessness. Um, and I know Elizabeth has some other points as well from here.
Yeah, I think like echoing everything Brian said, and then also we know, as we've mentioned, like there's traffickers who target young people who are experiencing unstable housing. And so if you're talking with someone, And they mentioned being stressed about finances, asking some questions like, how do you support yourself if your paycheck doesn't get you through the month, or if cash assistance or food stamps doesn't support you for the remainder of the month? If you hear them say that they have someone who helps them with their money or holds their money, or I don't have to hold my money, I just get anything that I want. A lot of traffickers will coerce young people by buying them expensive gifts, getting their hair done, getting their nails done, ordering them food often. And so they feel and do have access to high cost items, but they don't have access to their money. And so I think another thing that's important is if you are trying to refer someone to services, to know like what the intake process might be like or what the rules are like, because sometimes if you're working with someone and you've now identified that they're at risk for being unhoused, or you have concerns that they're engaging with a trafficker, sometimes there are freedoms that shelters don't allow, like a curfew. And then some youth are like, well, you know, that I'm an adult. I'm 18, 19, 20 years old. I have never had a curfew in my whole life. Sometimes that structure can be a deterrent. So if they are prepared to accept services, to make sure they understand what they're signing up for.
Also, just to add, also, some of the identification around whether a young person is at risk or at like on the verge of experiencing homelessness is about checking our own lens in which we're seeing things. So if you are a therapist at an outpatient clinic, you might see some of the things that Brian and Elizabeth just talked about as a decompensation in their mental health, right? Like it's that red car theory, right? If you're seeing a young person and all of a sudden they aren't showering, if you're seeing a young person and they're constantly distracted, all of us, right? Because this is our training, this is the world in which you're working. We're going to see that as pathology. We're going to see that as decompensation. So what we want to impart, and we want you to leave this webinar expanding that lens, thinking about what are some other factors, right? What are community factors? What are cultural factors? What else could be at play that might not be an internal pathology, might not be part of their mental health, obviously affecting their mental health. But this is not depression that they're not showering. This is they don't have a shower, and just allowing what if other questions. In particular, if you know that that young person is experiencing struggles with their family, right? If they've already talked to you about their family not wanting to use their preferred pronouns, or if their family is extremely religious and they're worried about coming out to their family, you all some of these things that are risk factors of a young person being not supported at home and feeling forced out. Even if a parent doesn't kick them out, they're feeling forced out because they're not accepted for who they are. So use those things that and just take a broader look.
I really appreciate that. It makes me think of time where I was working in a school-based clinic, and I'd often have, teachers or other sort of school staff that would be like, this kid has an anger problem, or they have a mental health problem, and they're always like snapping, and I'm like, when do you think the last time they ate was? A lot of things that can cause people to look like they have an anger problem can be things like, I just don't have consistent food, and I'm hungry all the time. So that's what sort of reminded me of. I really appreciate, because I do think that idea of like, if you're expecting to see something, you will see it. So if you're expecting to see something that's a mental health symptom, you're going to see it as a mental health symptom, and we don't always think of the alternatives. So we know that, and you mentioned things around, family trauma, right? So being family rejection. We know that trauma in general plays a big role in the lives of the young people that you serve. And I'm wondering if you could speak to sort of like the unique traumas maybe that they experience, but also what sort of a trauma-informed approach looks like for those young people. And I think, again, you've already spoken to it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could expand on it. Lisa, maybe what you could start us out.
I can start and then kick it off to the folks who are doing the direct work. But I spoke to this earlier, which is those things that we have often considered as maladaptive behaviors are really those things that have kept that young person safe. And those are actually strengths. And so the effects, the what has led them to us in so many cases, the traumas that got them there and the behaviors that are resulting from that trauma are their own personal strengths, their resiliency. And so our job is to know that. Our job is to, when we talk, they're like trauma informed is thrown around a lot, but one way to operationalize that, there are many ways to operationalize that, but one way is to understand, and Elizabeth and Brian will talk about what those traumas are, what some of those adverse childhood experiences are, but seeing those as strength and as a way to get them to where they want to go. And also super important is just having everybody involved in our programs and in our services, having training on what trauma is, what that means, how we can trigger trauma. Again, not personalizing things. I may look like somebody who has harmed them. And so I need to not take that personal if I'm not the person that they're connecting with, and being comfortable with saying, I'm gonna back off because I don't want to do harm. But I'll kick it off. Elizabeth, maybe you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think that's like the point that's like we can't underscore enough is that anything that would be easy to label as like maladaptive or self-sabotaging behavior, sometimes that was the behavior that allowed that young person to have a piece of control in their life. Because if they were placed in a foster care home and were throwing furniture, getting into fights, they would get moved. And if they didn't trigger the move with their actions, then it would be up to the agency when they got moved or placed, or it'd be up to the family. So I think just keeping in mind that whatever we're seeing has worked for some reason in some way, even if our hope, right, is for them to hit a certain goal or target, that might not be the young person's hope. The young person's goal might be to feel safe in my body and to feel in control of my life. And I do feel in control of my life by doing the things that I'm doing because it's my choice. And with the limited choices I have had throughout my life, these are the choices that I'm making. And so it's important that we are not just saying, but modeling that there's safety to make mistakes and try new things. Because if we're telling young people that instead of using the behaviors that kept them alive in so many places, to trust us to help negotiate peer conflict, right? Huge vulnerability to trust us to negotiate that. But then also we have to show them that there is an outcome that is still safe. And that comes with, and like learning new things comes with time too. So usually it's a match of, we want to talk about incorporating coping skills in a very concrete way, talking about what do you feel in your body when it's time to use a coping skill, what's happening around you when it's time to use a coping skill. But if we don't have the trust that trying out this coping skill is going to get the outcome that I want, then we're just talking in a vacuum. So it's just important to hold both of those things. And again, it's also part of like checking our ego at the door, because we might be the one that they're testing because they know that we are not going to respond the way that a peer would.
What you're saying about like sort of the centrality of control, at really giving them as much voice and choice as possible. I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about things that you do to make sure that youth do feel in control, that the services are sort of like youth centered in that way. And I'll just sort of volley back to you, Elizabeth, to get started, and then folks can.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to ask young people like about feedback on service delivery. If you want to, it's also easy to create like anonymous surveys because there are some clients that will be direct and give you feedback, and then there are other clients that are aware of power dynamics and they might not tell you to your face what their feedback is because they are worried that services might be closed off to them if they tell you something that they think or know you don't want to hear. And we also have launched a couple different youth internship programs so that we also are offering formal leadership opportunities for youth so that they can either pursue their career goals, or if they have the goal of being an advocate for young people who've had experiences like them, that we're also giving that option, but that's not the only option.
And I'll add to that. And we mentioned earlier as well. We try to make sure through all Covenant House, all programming, not just mental health services, that the young people know it's their choice. They have their self-determination in what they choose to do or not do at Covenant House, because we offer a wide variety of services from mental health to job and vocation, um, to education, etc. And a lot of people utilize the services, and that's great. And some don't utilize one, and that's their choice, right? And we let them know that it's their choice because they've grown up in systems or families that things aren't their choice. They're mandated, they're told to do something, whether it's by the parent, an adult. So now they finally have some self-determination. So we make sure to emphasize that even upon intake, we let them know of the services we have and that it's their choice. So we really like harp on that, not just the mental health team, but the case managers, resident advisors, etc. And then from there, we kind of have that motto of meet them where they're at, right? So let them know, okay, you're the author of what you do in therapy. So it could be that, we treatment plan together and work concretely on like depression and DBT skills, or it could be like you just want to sit down and check in and talk like for 45 minutes a week with no set agenda, but just like tell me how your week was. That's fine too. We let them be the author of that. And sometimes youth have even stigma around therapy, using the word therapy. So we tell them, okay, it doesn't have to be therapy. It could just be check-ins with a social worker weekly. So we give them that voice and choice in their journey in Covenant House, especially with the mental health aspect.
And I think too, one of the things that we really work to operationalize is that all of this is unconditional, right? Like our services are unconditional, our love is unconditional, and the work that we do is about what you want and how you want it. And we work to change our strategies to support whatever that is. And we also need to be checked on that too, because I think we all, grown-ups especially working with young people, we start to get paternalistic and start to take it personally. And so we as colleagues and as a community also have to call each other out when we find ourselves having those conversations like, oh, I sent her to this interview and she didn't show up 7 times. Like, the mom in me, and you're like, nope, not the mom in you, not the mom in you, not the mom in you. And having that vulnerability with each other, to allow the space for us to be like, oh, I brought my mom out, I need to stop that. Like, this is youth choice, this is not my opinion. I can provide my opinion, but I will provide it as my opinion. Do you want my 2 cents? I will offer it if wanted, but not demand anything to receive support and services.
That's really amazing. I feel like, it's sort of reminds me of a quote that I read recently that social work is not, like busting down a door, but it's knocking at a door and waiting to be invited in, right? And it's sort of that same thing. We want to make sure that, we are giving youth the chance to invite us in whatever capacity they feel like they want us to be invited in. And if they feel like they want us to be invited in. I love that. So I'm wondering if you could all speak to, again, a lot of the folks on this call are doing clinical work. And I know that you all have behavioral health services programs in addition to all of the programming you have. And I'm wondering what kind of interventions, and these could be evidence-based models, but it also could just be general clinical practices that you've found to be most effective in supporting the mental health needs of this population. And I'm wondering, Brian, maybe you could kick us off.
Sure thing. And I have a unique perspective, I think, because I was a practicing clinician with our mental health team for a few years, and now I'm more on the administrative side. So I've seen both ends of the situation. And kind of to what Lisa was saying just a few minutes ago, we don't fit the young people into the whole of the therapeutic model or process we're trying to do. We do it the opposite, where we try and get the interventions and models to fit what that young person needs in that moment. There's no one set intervention or evidence-based practice that is the most efficient or appropriate for the entire population. It's on an individualistic level. And I think that's the most important thing that we do. And we utilize a lot of DBT skills, right? We have our clinicians trained in DPT. However, given our program and the transient nature of our population, we can never do a full-blown to fidelity DBT program. So what our clinicians do is take the skills that would be the most beneficial for the young people and work that into their therapeutic plan. And I know Lisa introduced this kind of phrase to me since she's been here. We utilize like the tool belt approach, where we have all these tools, whether it's DBT skills, we're also trained in TFCBT, EMDR, harm reduction. So we have all these skills, and it's not one set formula for every young person, but let's see which tools from our tool belt we can pick up for this young person based on what they want to work on. So I think that's the approach we normally take, and Elizabeth can speak to this more because she's a currently practicing clinician. But I think that's the best approach for the young people, because and their needs change week to week. It could be one week they want to work on distress tolerance skills, and the next week it could be just, I want to work on my past trauma, right? So we just create the plan and move forward based on that young person's needs at the moment.
Yeah, and just like echoing what Brian pointed out, is that models are not made for our population. We are always adapting models for our youth. And that's something that is talked about in social work school. But I think we're doing that a little more like radically with the population that we're working with. And what's also important to keep in mind is that while youth have been mandated to go to therapy for so many years, potentially, a lot of times they're not receiving trauma therapy. There's some behavior that's been identified that they are doing that's a problem. And so, from their perspective, they feel bad all of the time and they don't know why. And they're like, I know I should process things that have happened to me, but the thought of telling another therapist about my history feels like I can't tolerate that. I don't think that I don't have hope that that's going to work. And so something that can be really helpful, especially if we are only working with someone for a short time, depending on, we have aftercare services, but there are some times where we have really short engagements with our youth, maybe a couple weeks. And so starting off with that psychoeducation piece in TFCBT can be really helpful and helping raise some awareness of specific things in their environment that are causing their body reactions. And some of the times they're describing like, I feel so out of control. I don't understand why I feel bad all the time. I regret my actions, how I talked to this person or how I handled this situation. in the moment, I felt like I was doing the right thing, but looking back, I don't know why I decided to say those things or do those things. And so it's sometimes important to keep in mind that psychoeducation can feel like a really like easy thing for people to have absorbed in some way, but there's some youth that they don't recognize that the way they're feeling bad all the time is actually because they're encountering trauma reminders.
Yeah, especially because those reminders can be really subtle and hidden, and it's not always, as clear as I feel like sometimes it's made to seem in like a textbook. Yeah, I think that's, yeah, you're sort of giving them the dots to help connect things, right? Giving them more information to help them make those connections. I love that.
Just too from an administrator's perspective, because as I was seeing who's on here, there's some leaders on this call. I think it's really important that we not be afraid to talk to model developers and talk to foundations and talk to funders about what we're seeing in the work. Everyone wants to support an EBM. Everybody wants to fund it. Everybody wants to hear that you're doing it. But I think it's really important for those of us that are in the work to talk about what that looks like on the ground and what it looks like operationalizing that. It's how we got funded to do EMDR. We talked about what it means to open a can of worms in TFCBT and not be able to close it because we can't get all the way through a trauma narrative because the young person isn't staying long enough or because of all the reasons, right? They're not showing up to sessions because of all the things we already talked about. And we wanted to try EMDR because it was a safe way to open up a can of worms, but you're changing those neural connections almost immediately. Well, yes, you are immediately, not almost immediately. And we know that. And that we may not get through everything, and having those real conversations with funders and supporting that. And since I'm not doing the direct work, listening to the clinicians, listening to those folks that are saying, I know you like TFCBT, but we're sitting in these sessions with our model developer and they're not helping us get to answer what we're asking for these young people, um, really supporting them in that and navigating those conversations with funders and with the model developers and having real conversations. And I have lots of experience with real big developers and adaptations. And sometimes you have a population they want to explore. So there may be other opportunities there for you to partner in ways that you wouldn't have known had you not asked the question about lack of fit.
I think that's really important. And I feel like, I feel like folks don't always have, like they have permission to sort of ask those questions but, I think that in general, like if there's going to be a logistical issue, right? Not even just a clinical issue, but a logistical issue, it's important to address those things early on and to listen also to the folks that are doing the work about, hey, this isn't actually going to pan out the way that this, RFP seems to be describing. I wanted to ask you all about sort of how you address the unique needs of youth experiencing homeless who come from marginalized backgrounds. So we talked, in the beginning about how, youth coming from different marginalized populations, whether it's youth of color, LGBTQ plus youth, new arrival youth or immigrant youth, parenting youth, how these populations are at greater risk of experiencing homelessness. And so I'm wondering how you address the need, so what are the specific needs of those different populations? And then also, how do you meet them where they are in terms of providing services? I don't know. I'm trying to think who started. Elizabeth, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of social workers and therapy providers who are white women, and there are white women who have been wonderful supporters to our youth. And then there are also a lot of white workers who've caused harm and trauma to clients. And so some clients might say to you, I really want a therapist that shares this specific identity with me. And then there are other youth who will see who they have been assigned to and then disappear. And they don't want to share, or feel uncomfortable saying to your face that they want a referral. And so what I say in my initial meetings with clients is I talk about confidentiality in our space. And then I also say, some people want mental health support outside of their housing situation, and that's completely fine. I can help with community referrals. I've also shown youth like navigating sites like Psychology Today, where we can filter for your insurance if you have insurance. And then we can also filter for background of education, but also like if you have a specific identity in mind that's important for you, or you want a therapist, like if you want someone who names that they have experience working, say, with LGBTQ clients, that there's filters for that, and it's easy to find that, thankfully, in an area like ours. And then keeping in mind, because we now are seeing as the population of New York City is changing, the population at Covenant House is changing. A lot of youth who are newcomers who think of therapy as something for Americans or something that's for white people. And so they don't identify with, I want a therapist, but they might think of, when I'm stressed or I need support, I talk to a religious leader or a trusted leader in my community. And so we can refer them to community providers that can also match them with like peer support systems. And so it's just important to keep in mind, like we've said, meeting the youth where they're at, what they're looking for, and some of the language we can use too to make sure that we're not hiding anything with what we're providing. But instead of talking about trauma therapies, we can also say, this relates a little to the trauma conversation we were having. We can also say, like, when you feel stress in your body, we want you to feel peace in your body, right? And so sometimes using language like that can be accessible, and that can either happen with us or with a community provider.
I think it's so important for us to identify who we are and what we represent in relation to the young people that we're working with, and that it goes for every relationship we have. We are a housing service provider, first and foremost. So many of the young people that are with us are living with us, and there is a huge power imbalance in that. We are supporting basic needs, and we don't want anyone to be afraid or fear losing housing because of what they might say. And so it's really important that we are talking, that Brian and Elizabeth are talking to their teams, and that we are acknowledging and comfortable and transparent with having conversations about what we represent, race, power, all of those things. And then also training our team to understand how they can have those kinds of conversations, because it doesn't always come naturally to folks. I think social work schools are doing better training folks now than they were. I realize I have a Zoom filter on, I think. So I look a lot younger, but I don't think we did a good job training social workers when I was in school about power. And we talked about white privilege, but we didn't talk about how to address it in a therapeutic relationship. There are so many folks out there training and doing great work. Dr. Kenneth Hardy talks a lot about racial trauma and not addressing trauma unless you're addressing racial trauma. We've brought him in to train folks, not just our therapists, but all of our team, because it's so critical, and he gives concrete tools in addressing that, and particularly because he's a clinician, how to do that in a therapeutic relationship. So it's very important globally too to have that support for your clinicians, because it may not be natural, it may be uncomfortable, and also you want to hold people accountable for having those conversations too, and you can't do that unless you're providing them the support and the guidance to get there.
I love that. Yeah, I love Dr. Ken Hardy's work also. I think that for those folks on the call that are not familiar with him, really can be really doing so much, and for so long has done so much important work. It sounds like also, Elizabeth, I like what you're saying, that sometimes the work is about figuring out how maybe I'm not the right provider, right? And so maybe my work as a therapist even is about helping you find a different therapist, right? A therapist that helps you. And that is still showing up for a young person, right? Maybe showing up means doing that, helping to figure out adult that can help meet those needs. Um, and you all have a lot in-house, right? So there's a lot of things where you'll be looking for referrals even in-house. But I also know that's not necessarily the case for all of the folks who are on the call, right? Some are working in mental health centers that are part of larger systems, and then some are sort of maybe more in, a center that is not on site with anything else. So I'm wondering if you can talk to a little bit about how those mental health providers can best collaborate with other services, and sort of what lessons you've learned both in working internally at Covenant House, but also then having to sort of work with providers that are providing services external to your organization. And maybe Brian, you could get us started.
Sure. Um, Part of what we do in terms of um, collaboration has to do with just networking sometimes, right? Putting yourself out there, doing outreach. Um, and then, like, I think one of the most beneficial things, and Elizabeth is part of this as well, is that we join collaborative projects. We have learning communities internally in Covenant House and externally. We're part of task forces, like we're part of a anti-human trafficking task force, and through that we've created partnerships with different organizations in New York City, and one of which, Sanctuary for Families, actually comes to Covenant House and does trainings for us. So it's about finding people that you can stand side by side with and are in the same field. And given, distances can be challenging, right? But this kind of platform, this kind of media is great because we could do a collaborative learning community with people from upstate New York, from people in Long Island, from people in the city, in these kind of online platforms and learning communities, and share what resources we have to provide virtually, right? Because some people can provide virtual resources, and what resources you can provide in person. And we get all sorts of calls sometimes from different hospitals, different uh, residential treatment centers, et cetera, to collaborate and to send youth to us, and vice versa. Like Elizabeth said, sometimes a young person may work better with another therapist. Maybe a young person that identifies as LGBTQ. Yes, they can meet with one of our therapists, but maybe they'll be more comfortable at Ali Forney Center. And creating that relationship with them, that way, when we have a referral, we can call them and make the referral, and have that kind of warm handoff. So I think just outreach, networking, and like I'm really a believer in these kind of learning communities and task forces, and having this platform where maybe once a month or so you all come together in a space and share and resource share and just have that connection.
It, we're like Elizabeth was saying too, these referrals are so important, and we're always looking for referral partners. And so having these sort of collaborative community task forces and relationships is so helpful, because then we can trust too who we're sending a young person to. And I mean, I see some of our partners are on this call, and it's so important that we are all in spaces together and in conversation together. And I mean, we develop MOUs with folks so we can really have concrete referral pathways. And so I think as an administrator, I also just cannot say enough, like reach out. I've had therapists reach out to me directly because I'm on the website. Like, how do I send somebody your way? We're always excited to get that information, just like we're always excited to find somebody that we can refer somebody to. There are so many service providers out there doing great things, and there are some that are like a perfect fit for somebody who you're working with. And so creating those clear supportive pathways to refer somebody are just, it's critical. And I think COVID and this Zoom environment have made that so much easier to do, because we can connect with people we've never been able to connect with before in ways that develop meaningful relationships. And that just didn't exist before this. Like, we would never be able to be in space with folks from Buffalo in this kind of way. And I think that's so beautiful and important and cannot be underscored. We have young people coming from Buffalo. We have young people going to Buffalo. So how do we develop, I don't know, let's Google. We could do that too, but how great to be in space together and learn who we are.
I love that. Well, you heard it here, folks. Reach out. I think that's really fantastic. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to go to our some of the questions that have come in over the course of the and so thank you all so much already. But I just want so it seems like folks are really bringing in questions. So it clearly is resonating with folks. So let's see. We had a question come in early on about what the data is, or just what your experience is in terms of why youth of color, and particularly Black youth, are so disproportionately represented amongst the young people that you serve.
Structural racism. Our society is designed to negatively impact Black people, people of color, anyone that is not white. We are structured in a way to support the demise and the dismantling of support systems and real and dismantling of communities. And so that's the reason. And so it's also part of why we were so excited to be here today, because our mission, like I said, is to end youth homelessness as we know it. And that can't happen just from us working with young people when they're homeless. We want to get upstream. We want to talk to folks that are meeting young people in these systems, in their communities, before it happens, and help identify what some of those risk factors are. And so it's really important that we as a collective are working to dismantle too the systems that exist to keep the racist structures organized and acknowledge our part in that.
Great. We had a couple questions come in about involving families and how that works. Whether are you ever serving families where there's youth at risk of homelessness, and or even with youth that are homeless? What kind of how do you include caregivers, or is that something that happens? And then sort of how you go about doing that.
So I can take that one. So youth at risk of homelessness, if they've never been to our program, we don't usually, work with them before they come through our doors. But we do work with families in certain aspects. So if a young person that's staying with us wants to involve their family, we have done joint sessions virtually, not in person, but virtually, with like a young person and a parent, right? So we involve family in that aspect. We also have one of our programs is a DOHMH funded scatter site program called Family Cov, where we have families that are living with us in apartments through the city. Like, so they're not with us, but they're with Covenant House. And these families are sometimes like one parent, a mother with a child, or a parent with two children, or a parent and their spouse and children, or a parent and their partner and two children. So we do work with families, and we don't necessarily provide like family therapy per se, but we provide like parenting skills. We provide case management. We provide individual therapy. Sometimes we've even like done like sorts of marriage counseling with some people in that program as well. So we definitely try and involve families as best as we can, but not every young person wants their family involved. A lot of them don't. So in those cases, we tend to like just exclude that altogether. Like sometimes the young person will only sign consent to reach out to family for an emergency, but that's it. So it's a case by case basis, but we do serve families in certain cases.
So, Elizabeth, is there anything? Just want to give you an opportunity to jump in.
No, I echo everything my colleagues shared.
Um, Fantastic. So someone was wondering about what are some of the challenges that you encounter where clients are involved with different systems, whether it's court systems or other systems?
Where do we begin? I think that we, on a macro level, we are sort of a landing place for the experiences that young people have had with systems. I spent most of my career in the juvenile justice system, and those young people also had foster care involvement, and there was no home for them to go back to. And so young people, it's what one of the reasons that drove me to Covenant House. Young people were exiting from justice placements into homelessness, which is despicable. And there's a huge correlation. We talked about foster care involvement, but there's a huge correlation in past justice system involvement. And as you can imagine, talking about crimes of survival and getting arrested for stealing basic needs, getting arrested for prostitution, right? Like those things that the young people are doing for survival that then become crimes that they're arrested for, thrust into the justice system for. We are a safe haven for young people who are experiencing system involvement. And we are a soft place for them to land, but it is very complex. We are lucky. We have a legal services department who can support and advocate for a young person during their case, make sure that they are properly represented in their case, and make sure that they don't get lost in a system that's also, when I talk about institutionalized racism and structures that are designed to oppress and keep people, specifically people of color, down, we can help be a level setter and making sure everyone knows their rights. We're constantly doing Know Your Rights for all youth. We're constantly now with our newcomer population, what are their rights? What are their worries? How are we supporting them and keeping them safe, particularly in the new climate? And so, yes, lots of barriers, but lots of opportunity as we see it. The barriers are really an opportunity for us to support a young person where they would otherwise not be supported and sort of get lost in systems designed to keep them lost.
We had a couple questions about sort of things about like just how Covenant House supports its staff internally. It seems like folks are talking about, one thing that someone wrote is working on boundaries with staff, and how you all support the folks that you work on and working with boundaries, and how that can be really difficult with vulnerable populations that have large and complex needs. Yeah, I would love if you could speak to that.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about in our trainings with, when we have new staff joining our agency is like how case conferences are used and how information is shared. And like with my role specifically working on the trafficking team, like we're not advertising, right, youth who've had a trafficking history, but we're communicating with folks assigned to that young person to make sure we're matching the services. And we talk about how in our mental health training and also the anti-human trafficking training that sometimes information can feel comfortable, where we feel like if I know all the traumatic experiences the youth has had then I won't re-traumatize them. I'll support them. I'll make sure that I don't do any of the things that their abuser did. But that's not really the case. We have youth, even when they're assigned to a social worker or a case manager, they're not telling that person every single thing that's happened to them. But what we can communicate about is written safety plans. We can communicate when youth express specific triggers, and we can talk as a team about how to make sure that we're supporting youth when they encounter those triggers. Because there are things that we can avoid, but then there are some youth who like are triggered by like the sound of a male staff's voice. And so that's not something we're going to remove from our setting, but we also want to make sure that we're talking with the youth about coping skills they can use and also talking to the staff about what they can do to support the youth so that the youth, because it's wonderful when we have a strong relationship with the youth as their social worker, but also we are not there 24/7. And we're also not going to be in their life 24/7. And so it's important that the youth feel safe to use those coping skills and that the staff feel like they also like have a safety plan that they can use as a tool so that if it's a youth they don't know super well, that they still feel like they can do their best and nothing is hidden from them to help them support the youth. So we're sharing useful information to support people, but that doesn't mean we share every single thing that's ever happened to them.
We also don't leave all boundaries up to employees. So, because it's so much easier when you have a policy to refer to, right? When you are required certain things, then you're forced to have that boundary, and you're forced to, because this is hard work, and we're not selling widgets, right? Like, people are coming here because they're bringing their full selves to this, and they want to give that full self to the young person. The things that work best in our work is the relationship, but we also have to have boundaries because we're working with 1,600 young people a year. We have 200 staff. It's not we don't have enough to give to everyone if we're not holding boundaries. So we train a lot on boundaries. We have a lot of expectations of what staff can and can't do. And so they can refer to a policy. They can be held accountable to a policy by their supervisor, supported in that. So they also don't feel like they're making an active choice to hold a boundary and then feel guilty about it and feel all of the things that you feel as a clinician.
That's great. So it sounds like a combination of like training, but also having that policy to back it up. That's really great. It also sounds like you all have a lot of sort of interdepartmental communication as well. Someone mentioned that as well about how it seems like that sort of constantly talking to each other is something that is a big strength for Covenant House. And I'm wondering if that's something you could speak to about sort of how you are how you've achieved that feat.
Brian, you want to talk about? We try. We're not perfect. We sound perfect, but our attempt is very earnest.
Yeah, and we try, and sometimes we fail. That's just being honest, but we try as best we can to have this interdepartmental collaboration and communication. It starts usually at the top. So like my department and other departments, our leadership are starting the collaboration and kind of from top down towards the other staff in the departments. That way we can create a space where people can bring their opinions and thoughts to the table, and bring it to the table with the recognition of you may not agree with people's opinions, you may not agree with decisions, but you can respect it, right? Because we're all here for the same reasons. We're all here for the young people. So just because I have a difference of opinion with, say, residential leadership, maybe I'm not agreeing with that, but I can respect it because I know we're all here for the same reason for that young person. And we also do this by creating spaces. So with all departments, actually, we have like a daily 10 a.m. meeting where a lot of leaders from the departments come together and share what the department's doing that day or that week. Um, And, it could be something as simple as, our youth development has activities in the gym tonight, or our mental health team has our DBT skills group at 10:30 a.m. Or Elizabeth's anti-human trafficking team has a workshop that afternoon. So having that space, and that we call it a daily rounds meeting, that's one of the key pieces of communication, because that allows us to like know what the people are doing, and also to update them on goings on within the department. So I think that space, and also this case conference that we do as well, again, between departments, where we can go up case by case with some of the more challenging young people to create a plan moving forward on how best to support them. So those kind of spaces allow for that collaboration, and again, good collaboration sometimes and not so good sometimes. Like, we're not perfect, but we always try.
Well, I think that that's a great place to end. Some hope that we're always always trying. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing at Covenant House, and also for being here. Thanks to everybody who attended today. We are going to be putting a link into the chat. Thank you so much, Leslie, for doing that. To our feedback survey, if folks could leave us feedback, both on today's event, but also on topics you'd be looking for future events. And thank you all so much, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.